My friends, please welcome the Reverend Al Rodriguez, the Reverend Dr. Bradley Hauff, the Reverend Dr. Fennie Chang, and the Reverend Ronald Byrd, our distinguished speakers this afternoon. You're in alphabetical order. Thank you. The Reverend Al Rodriguez is a member of the consulting team of the Episcopal Church's Office of Latino-Hispanic Ministries, teaching Latino ministry competency churchwide. A former Peace Corps volunteer in Venezuela, he's based in the Diocese of Texas, where he was rector of St. John's in Austin for 15 years. He was founding director of El Buen Samaritan Episcopal Mission, which provides a range of services from healthcare to workforce development to the Latino and Spanish-speaking people of Travis County and its neighbors. He teaches, does research, and writes about all these issues. The Reverend Dr. Bradley S. Hauff is the indigenous minister for the Episcopal Church, and as such, a member of the presiding bishop's staff. Born in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and raised in Rapid City, he is enrolled with the Ogallala Sioux tribe, Lakota, of Pine Ridge, as were his parents. A priest for over 30 years, he has served congregations in South Dakota, Minnesota, Florida, and Pennsylvania. A former adjunct faculty member and trustee of Seabury Western Theological Seminary, now Bexley Seabury, he has written numerous articles and made frequent presentations around the church on Native American issues. Originally from Taiwan, the Reverend Dr. Fennie Chang was ordained a priest in 2012 right here in Los Angeles. She served as a campus missioner at UC Irvine for 6 years before beginning her current ministry as vicar at St. Thomas's in Hacienda Heights. She received her PhD from the University of Toronto and taught at the college level for over 10 years. For our diocese, she convenes our Episcopal Asia America Ministries collective of Chinese clergy and is a twice elected deputy to General Convention. She also served on the team of translators who staffed the 2022 Lambeth Conference for Anglican bishops. Finally, my fellow native Michigander, the Reverend Ronald Byrd, is the Episcopal Church's missioner for ministry to people of African descent, and so with Brad, a member of the presiding bishop's staff. He has served churches in Michigan, Washington, D.C., and Virginia. He's been a deputy to General Convention and was a design team member for the International Black Clergy Conference in Houston in 2016, and a member of the Joint Nominating Committee for Presiding Bishop, plus numerous leadership roles in the church-wide Union of Black Episcopalians. Before we go further and get into this rich conversation with these experts, a little bit about process. We want to get as much dialogue here as possible in the time remaining this afternoon, so we're going to push right up to the limit of the adjournment time because we don't want to miss an opportunity to learn all we can. We'll have some exchanges with the panelists. Then we'll have a moment Q&A. We'll invite you to come to the microphones and ask questions directly to them. We'll then have some table talk. And at each table there is a page with 3 very simple, basic questions for you to think about. You don't need to be confined to those questions, but they'll at least get you talking. At 5 of the tables, there should be a sheet with a big red dot on it. These tables were chosen randomly. And after you've had some time for table talk, we're going to invite a representative from those 5 tables to come to the mic, and if you choose, summarize a little bit about your table talk. Also, there are some Post-it notes and markers at tables, and if you'd like to put some further thoughts down after our time together, the youth ushers will collect those and we'll keep track of all of those insights. In a 2020 interview with our own Pat McCann, Ron Byrd said, "Being woke means first facing up to the challenge and the concerns that face our community. The second piece is what we do about it, and what we do about it as community, even though our culture, background, and ethnic histories are different," which sets the stage perfectly for our conversation this afternoon. My first question is to Al Rodriguez. My colleagues, sometimes we hear parish and mission leaders in Southern California and around the Central Coast say Since they're not aware of having any Spanish-speaking neighbors, their church isn't called to do Hispanic Latino ministry. Are they right?
Well, I'm going to take a via media approach to that question, Bishop. Yes and no. Yes, they're right, because in many instances, there's indeed a congregation, an Anglo congregation especially, that would not have any Latinos, period, within their vicinity. So that is a true statement. Some Anglo parishes, in fact, many Anglo parishes, congregations, would not be within a close proximity to a Latino population in the area. However, I think that we have now 62 million Latinos in the country, and they come in a variety of nationalities, ethnicities, language, and so forth, and particularly in California and Texas and the rest of the Southwest. You can hardly throw a stone and not hit a Latino residence or Latino home. So I think that we have to look at that question from several sides. To begin with, sometimes the statement of there are no Latinos in my neighborhood, sometimes is because it's an honest but mistaken notion that there are no Latinos in the area. So of course the first order of business is to determine from a real honest to goodness analysis, demographic analysis, if indeed there are Latinos in the area. Now the question also presupposes that there's almost like a profile of Latinos that people think about. And as you well know, here in California and we in Texas, we know that there are all kinds of Latinos, all generations of Latinos, some of second, third, fourth, fifth generation plus, that have been in the areas where they now reside for generations, actually for several hundred years. As we say, they didn't cross the border crossed them. And so we have to take a look at that notion. Sometimes it's stereotypical thinking. Sometimes the person who says, I'll call him Mr. Episcopalian. Okay. Mr. Episcopalian will say, there are no Latinos in my area or my neighborhood. What he might be saying, and not necessarily from a negative or a mean way of saying it, but that person might be saying, there are no Latinos in my area or my neighborhood like the Latinos that are working next door putting up the framing of the house next to me. Or they don't look like, we don't have any Latinos who look like the people who bus dishes at my favorite restaurant. Or other things of that sort, where there's a kind of a notion that Latinos are all in one category. And so I would have to say that while there are indeed people who honestly have no Latinos or might think that they have no Latinos, the truth of the matter is that we don't know until you actually do dig below the surface and see what kind of Latinos you might have.
Thank you, Al. Bradley, you concluded an eloquent address to a certain other Province 8 diocese convention by saying this: we're all related, so let's turn the world upside down and in a good way. How do you believe that living into creation's radical interrelatedness could transform society and the church?
I want to begin with a phrase in the Lakota language. That's the language spoken by the Oglala Sioux, the tribe that I belong to, the Oglala Lakota Oyate. And that phrase is Mitakwasi. Mitakwasi. It means all my relatives. We say that a lot. We say that to each other. We say that when we pray. We say it before we eat. We typically say it at the conclusion of a talk or a speech that one of us is giving. Mitakwasi. What does that mean? Well, it means that we are all relatives, every one of us. We are connected. And not just to each other as human beings, but to all of creation, the cosmos. All that is of the world, the earth that we see, is our relative. So that includes animals, fish, birds, insects, everything that crawls. And it also includes the things that, to the Western mind anyway, are not considered to be living. Rocks, mountains, clouds, the weather, the wind, the stars and planets of the cosmos, of the universe. We are all related. We are all connected. We believe the Great Spirit has made things that way. And human beings, we have a place in that creation. And we are to know that place, and we are to stay there. Now, if we lived our lives in that manner, and some of us do and some of us have, but if you have not looked at things that way, if that hasn't been your Weltanschauung or your worldview, think of how it would change your life and your views if you did. If you treated everything that you see, every human being and all of creation as your relative. It would change your life, and in a good way. It would turn things upside down. We tend to see life organized in a lineal manner where it has a beginning and it has an end, and a hierarchical manner where there's some of creation at the top and then others below it. And our Judeo-Christian tradition seems to teach us, well, it's in Scripture, that humans have dominance, or we're at the top. And indigenous worldviews do not teach that. Indigenous worldviews do not teach human dominance. Now, we see what happens when humans try to dominate. They go outside the parameters that our Creator has given us to live within, and we cause problems. We see it every day. We see it in pollution. We see it in carbon footprint. We see it in climate change. We see it in the destruction of resources and the selfishness and the greed and the dysfunction. We see it in war. We see it in domestic violence. We see it all the time, tragically, throughout. And it's because human beings have asserted their dominance. We've tried to take control. And what indigenous worldviews teach us is that we are participants in life. We are not in control of it. So in living life in this way, we can see a transformative thing happen. I think the balance and relational harmony that was intended to be found throughout the world and in the cosmos would return. And I find it to be quite ironic that these indigenous values, which I believe can save the planet, can turn things around and save humanity, are the very values that the dominant society tried to stamp out of us when we were subjected to genocide and cultural assimilation. We need to know our place, and we need to know that we are all related. The Bible, in a way, teaches that. We don't always recognize it, but there's an order to things. And we are honoring the Great Spirit. We are honoring God when we know what that is and live out our lives in that manner.
Thank you so much, Bradley. Fennie, our colleague, we know you as vicar of a church, St. Thomas's in Hacienda Heights, that is multicultural and polylingual while remaining a unified community, worshiping together, enjoying fellowship together, and serving your neighbors together. What are the keys to your success at St. Thomas?
I want to start with the passage from Revelation chapter 7, verse 9. I think we read that on All Saints Sunday, and so this is familiar to all of us. A great multitude that no one could count from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. This passage not only speaks to me that day, but actually has been kept in my mind at all times as I'm serving my congregation, which are multicultural, because that's a picture that I always remind myself of striving for. And actually, I thank God for giving me this opportunity and to work together with St. Thomas congregation in Hacienda Heights to make it come true. And so Bishop just asked, what's the key to the success? I wouldn't say success, but this is an opportunity to become a window through which people living in our neighborhood be able to see what is the kind of life that we can live out with the love of God. And so we've been remaining open and welcoming to our neighbors. For example, we renting out our space to a Montessori school. And so children of new immigrants with Chinese background come into this campus, and 80% of them are immigrants that moved into this country not too long ago. So this is opportunity for them to come into church. And we also rent our space to like outside groups, local choirs, and also including a Chinese Cultural Association. They provide Chinese school and provide training for line dance. So all these kinds of opportunity we provide to the community to make ourselves welcoming and open, and also to let them know more about us. And it happens that many of them are immigrants with Chinese background. That's why we got a chance to invite them to join our worship. And also during our worship service, we've been doing it bilingually. And of course, this is challenging for me as the preacher, because at the same time I also play the role of interpretation. So I speak English, Mandarin, the same time back and forth. It's challenging, but it makes the pace going more smoothly for the congregation to be able to feel inclusive, like no matter where they're from, they speak English, they speak Mandarin, they all feel included in this worship service. Besides, we also have Sunday luncheon, and thank God for bringing me a group of gracious people. They are all willing to offer luncheon by taking turns, bring food to church every Sunday. And through the luncheon, St. Thomas congregation getting the chance to mingle together. They sit at the table from different cultures, and then they get to know each other. And moreover, food is also a reason that people would like to stay behind after the service. And we always be able to provide food from all different cultures. And so these are examples that I would like to share with you why St. Thomas become a multicultural congregation. But one important reason is also to provide opportunity for a congregation member to work together across culture, across languages. And we just celebrated 60th anniversary not long ago. And to prepare for the program, for the celebration, I I try to put people from different cultures together, working as a team to perform different programs, and each one of them are assigned, something to do to prepare for the event. So that principle behind my mind all the time is no one is left behind. So when doing church ministry, I always remember put people together working as a team across language, across culture, and actually this is a very effective way to make them feel that they are welcome, they are included, and they can contribute the gifts that God gave to them.
Thank you, Fennie. Ron, it turns out you've got a busy weekend in Los Angeles because on Sunday you'll visit historic St. Barnabas Church in Pasadena, formed by people of African descent who weren't welcome back in the day at nearby All Saints Church. Several of our churches in our diocese have similar creation stories, institutions formed in the crucible of racism. How common is this around the Episcopal Church? And how good are dioceses and parishes at telling these stories and being accountable?
Thank you, Bishop. This is a story that we see across the Episcopal Church. Much like St. Barnabas, many of our churches found themselves or were founded because they were not allowed to participate and be involved in white churches. And what's interesting about this is I go around the Episcopal Church, many of these churches are just a block away or 2 blocks away, but in the same community. And those situations that were created many years ago in the Episcopal Church still exist today. The white church is on one corner, and the Church of African Descent is a half a block or a block down the street. And what strikes me when I visit some of these communities is that there is not much collaboration between those communities. You just don't see it. But there are a few shining lights out there. I was thinking about the Diocese of East Carolina as I was considering this thought today, where 4 churches of African descent reside in one community. Many of them now have maybe 5 to 10, no more than 15 parishioners attending on a Sunday. But it is a white church, a large white church, about 2 blocks away that decided to come in and to support and to collaborate and contribute and work with those parishes. I was so excited by that. And right now we see some movement going on, but it was because our white siblings came into that community to help out. Let me say one other thing about this conversation here. And I want to thank my colleagues for their opening comments, Al and Brad. In particular, some of the comments. We're relatives and we're all one. And I want to put a string through that as we continue our conversation today. The Black Episcopal Church, as we know it, is in crisis. Let me say that one more time. The Black Episcopal Church, as we know it, is in crisis. Our churches are closing weekly, daily, monthly. This is hitting in all of our urban cities around the Episcopal Church. And a lot of this has to do with much of what we're talking about here, Bishop. What has happened many years ago has come home to roost. In the recent parochial report, and I was shocked to read the recent parochial report, the number of people of African descent participating in the Episcopal Church since the last parochial report, which I believe was really right before the pandemic, has almost dropped in half. In half. Whereas 4 years ago, there were 250,000 people of African descent participating in the Episcopal Church. Now the number is just a little over 100,000. The church is in crisis. We need to respond to that. And I don't have time to tell you all of the things that I'm trying to do to respond to that. But the church is in crisis. But we need our white siblings to lean in. When I was listening to Al a few minutes ago speak about people proclaiming that they're not Hispanics in their community, we hear the same thing. We hear the same thing. But you know why they're not in your community? It's because we don't go to those communities. They're there. But we don't go to those communities. And something the bishop said earlier today, I invite you, along with the bishop, to go visit these historically black congregations across the Diocese of Los Angeles. Go visit, spend some time with them, meet new friends, engage with them. And only then do I think we may be able to save what's left. But we are in crisis, and I can tell you my office is working very hard on this issue, working with several bishops as well. I'm really pleased to see the work that the People of African Descent group is doing here. But we're in crisis. And if we don't do something soon, and if we, in the unity, in the spirit of what Brad spoke about, become relatives and work together and know that we all depend on each other, you can look around and you're not going to see folks in your community.
So Al, you are renowned in Texas as a leader and an innovator in mission work and in institution creation. So if I were a rector and a vicar, and I wanted to offer worship or any other kind of programming in my church in Spanish to my neighbors, and I'd never tried it before, what would my checklist for success be?
Bishop, if I could take a little bit of license, I was inspired by your woke message. I think Latino ministry has entered into a woke era. And the reason I say this is for the last 50, 60 years in this country, Latino ministry has been very active. It has progressed, it has evolved, it has come of age, and now we have close to 300 Latino congregations across the country. What we are now in this woke mentality are seeing is that there in the U.S., we have a social demographic reality that the Episcopal Church really has not even noticed. And that is that out of 3 Latinos that are here, let's say, in the country, out of the total Latino population that we've got, 2 out of 3 are native born and either bilingual or English dominant. And so what we've got here is that we're now seeing in the Latino community, Latino population, a kind of a dual layer of Latino-ness. One layer is that layer that we know very well, which is the immigrant Spanish-speaking Latino from all parts of Latin America and the Caribbean. And we, in the Episcopal Church, know really how to minister to that type of Latino. But we do not know how to minister to Al Gonzalez or Richard, Garcia, who has been here for a long time in the country, speaks no Spanish, but is ethnically and also a true Latino in his own mind, his or her own mind. And so what I'm saying is that this checklist that we would be talking about, and we have a checklist, but the checklist has an overarching reality that now we have not only the immigrant Latino who speaks Spanish, but we also have a number, in fact, 2/3 of the Latino population, as I said, were the native born and who are English prone. And so the checklist that we can recommend to you, the first thing that we have to say to you is, what kind of Latinos do you have in front of you? Are they from Oaxaca, recently come over from Oaxaca or some region in Guatemala or in El Salvador? Or do you have the type of Mexican Americans that predominate in the Southwest? And so the checklist that we can recommend to everybody is first determine the contextual situation that you've got in front. We have to almost put on a hat like a church planter who goes and delves into the community to understand what makes it tick. What is happening in this community? What are the relationships between the Latino community and the Anglo community? All kinds of things that a church planter has to take notice of, and this is the first thing that we have to recommend to you. In that, we have to kind of put on our hat of a church planter. Or, if that doesn't turn you on, let's talk about the business executive who does a feasibility study before they start a new business venture. And all those myriad of details that you have to get into in order to determine, is this a go or a no-go situation? Okay.
Thank you, Al. Bradley, I was struck when you said that Jesus' essential values were present in indigenous Native American expressions before the conquerors and colonizers arrived. How could understanding Jesus as a native or indigenous Messiah help us reclaim the true faith and be better evangelists in a secularizing time?
Jesus is amazingly indigenous. Jesus really is. I want to quote Bishop Stephen Charleston, who, I don't know if he said this first or if somebody else did, but he's the first guy I heard say it. Before 1492, God was not an absentee landlord to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. God was present with our ancestors as God is present with all people. And in our wisdom, in our teachings, in our ceremonies, we knew of Christ. There's a Christ figure in just about all of our sacred traditions. Now, before 1492, we didn't know about Jesus of Nazareth, the first century Palestinian Jew, but we knew Christ. Christ was revealed to us. When the early missionaries encountered my ancestors, the Lakota, in what is now South Dakota, and began to teach the gospel, we picked up on that right away. We hadn't heard of this Jesus of Nazareth person, but we recognized that the person being taught was the Christ that we always knew. So the missionaries, in a sense, didn't bring us something that we didn't already have. We just knew Christ in an indigenous way. In my tribe, the Oglala Lakota Oyate, our Christ figure was female, the white buffalo calf woman. And all of our teachings lead back to that messianic type figure. In other traditions, it's different. There are over 570 federally recognized tribes in the United States alone, so each one has its own tradition. But I have found Christian values present in indigenous teachings, absolutely. And Jesus said some things that were amazingly indigenous. Learning from non-human teachers, for example, which is always a part of indigenous education. Humans don't just teach us, but non-humans teach us as well. Remember when Jesus is wrestling with the question that's given to him, how do you live your life as a faithful person? And what does Jesus say? He says, look at the birds. Look at the birds and how they live. They're not anxious, and their Heavenly Father takes care of them. The birds are your teachers. Learn from them. That's a very indigenous thing to say. And if you're anxious about the future and want to know what the future is going to entail, look at the trees and look at how they change over the seasons and learn from them. They are your teachers. Another very indigenous thing to say. When Jesus was in the wilderness, interacted with all the elements of the wilderness. Indigenous people do that when we go on our vision quests and spend time with nature. We see all that's in nature as our relative, and we have conversations with them and debates and dialogues of all sorts of things. And then there is that one passage that's in Mark and Matthew, I believe, where Jesus encounters a fig tree. He's hungry one morning. I believe he's traveling from Bethany to Jerusalem or something like that. And he finds a fig tree, and he thinks he can go there and get figs. And he gets to the tree, and there are no figs on it. And so he curses the fig tree. A lot of us preachers don't know what to do with that. So we tend to ignore it, pretend it's not there, even though it is in 2 of the Gospels. It makes perfect sense to an indigenous person because Jesus, as a teacher, is taking the role of an elder. An elder. And one of the things that elders do is that they offer criticism if things are not right. And they'll be very assertive about it. They will do it even publicly. And it can be kind of awkward and embarrassing to see when it happens, but it's their role in indigenous culture. They're the source of wisdom, and they are to make things right when they're not right. It's often been said that you're not genuinely an indigenous person until you've had your butt chewed by an elder. It's true. So that's what Jesus is doing. Jesus is giving critical feedback to his relative, the fig tree, who is not living up to expectations. When our indigenous ancestors read stories like that in the gospel, it made perfect sense to them, and they came to the conclusion, at least in my tribe, that Jesus must be a Lakota. Because only a true Lakota would be so wise. Only a true Lakota would be so generous. Only a true Lakota would be so brave, going to his death on the cross like Jesus did. So Jesus is a Lakota. And that's how I see it. And I think something like that, looking at Jesus in that way, not only benefits indigenous people, but non-indigenous people as well, because it opens up new doors for us to view Jesus, and it emphasizes the universality of the Christ. Christ is universal. Christ is for all people. Christ is for the world. Therefore, Christ cannot be confined to any one culture or language, or I would even argue, religion.
Thank you, Bradley. So back to Fennie. As a member of the Chinese diaspora, you are acutely aware of how people of Chinese descent were cruelly and cynically scapegoated during the pandemic. If conflict were to occur between mainland China and Taiwan, it could get a lot worse. We pray it won't happen, but if it does, how can our churches begin getting ready right now to care for and support our neighbors of Chinese descent?
There's no better place than God's church to provide solution to the conflict. St. Thomas Church I serve just celebrated 16th anniversary. And in our event, our Chinese language congregation, consisting of people from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China, they work together to perform a drama based on the story of Ruth. But of course, they change the context into, they put the story into the context today. Here, people as immigrants, how they face their challenges with the faith in Christ. And that drama was beautifully presented. Our bishop also was there. But what's more beautiful is The director is from Hong Kong, and then the actors, actresses who participate in the drama, they were from China, Taiwan, Hong Kong. Even in this drama, they spoke Mandarin, but people could tell they spoke Mandarin with different accents because they were from different areas of this world. But the language barrier or the cultural barrier hadn't become any problem between them because they can still work together as a selfless team to make this drama possible. And actually, not only in drama, in their church life, they also live out that spirit and to show to the people in our community that God's love is the best solution to any conflict that exists in that region where the tensions still make people worry. And so this is what's happening in my church today. But also, I think many of you thinking about how many Chinese immigrants in your neighborhood. Let me tell you, according to statistics, in China or Taiwan, the percentage of self-identified Christians still very low. In China, last year, the statistic shows no more than 2% of Chinese population proclaimed that they were Christian. And in Taiwan, only near 4%. But when we put the context here, 1 out of 3 Chinese language-speaking immigrants became Christian here. But before they moved here, they probably had no idea what Christianity is. But 1 out of 3 became Christian. Why? Why did they choose to become Christian after moving here? Because they need support, because they need care, because they need resources. That's why a lot of them were attracted to church. And through the support of the church, they found their identity, and they found care for, and then they were baptized and became Christian. But see, the statistics shows there were still 2/3 of other Chinese immigrants. They were still searching for support. And this immigrant may be in your neighborhood. So I hope that my sharing here will inspire you to open your door to welcome those people. And also, the one thing I would like you to be aware of, the first generation Chinese language speaking immigrants, most of them chose to join a monolingual congregation. That means, the parents probably feel more comfortable joining a congregation who only speaks Mandarin. But the second, third generation, that means their younger generation, they're no longer fluent in Mandarin. They speak English most of the time. But the problem is they don't feel comfortable in their parents' church. But in that case, their younger generation stop going to church because they hop around. They just cannot find a church. If the church speak English, but they don't feel they cannot find their identity. They don't feel that they were welcome. But if they go to a Mandarin-speaking church, they feel that that's where their parents belong. And so in this situation, how can we help the second generation Chinese language speaking immigrants? I would like to share a good news with you. In our diocese, we have a ministry called The Gathering. And that's an Asian American ministry. And this ministry provides space for Asian American, whether first generation, second generation, third generation, they're all welcome to join their space, to tell their story, and they can find their identity there. So if you would like to get to know more people in that, and like those people who are from other country, especially from Asia, and they still looking for churches, I would invite you to join their next gathering this coming December. December 7th, they would have a gathering, their Advent service in St. John Cathedral. So if you go there that day, you will get to see many Asian American, especially second, third generation, and you will get to know them. I know they not from the same churches. They all, spread all over this diocese, but some of them may still looking for a church. And so if you go there, and you may find people that you can invite to your congregation. So I'm sharing with you here is to let you know what's going on in the life of many Asian immigrants, especially Chinese language-speaking immigrants, first generation, second generation, third generation. Through the love of God, they found that it's their home, and so but only a small number of people they found their spiritual home here. I hope that a lot of you may be inspired to go out and to get to know more immigrants in your neighborhood that are looking for spiritual home.
Thank you, Fennie. Thank you both for the invitation to the gathering, as well as the residents with Al's remarks about second, third, and fourth generation Hispanic and Latino people. Ron, I've got a crazy idea for you. I apologize in advance. Richard Allen and Absalom Jones established the Free African Society together in 1787, as you know so well. While remaining friends, they took different institutional paths. 5 or 6 years later, Allen founded Mother Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia. Jones became the first African American to be ordained an Episcopal priest. We talk all the time about common mission with our Methodist siblings, our Lutheran siblings, and we should do that. But some of my liveliest conversations and collaborations have been with ordained AME colleagues. What about TEC and AME getting together in the friendly spirit of their founders?
What a crazy idea, Bishop. Because if we joined or got together with our AME folk, we would go over to that church and may not come back. It's a real concern, quite frankly. I don't know how many of you have actually been to the African Episcopal Church of St. Thomas in Philadelphia, which is where Absalom Jones got his start many, many years ago. But in many ways, that church looks a lot like the AME church. Yeah. Let me tell you a little bit some that you may not know about the AME church. The African Methodist Episcopal Church is larger than the Episcopal Church by almost 1 million people. These are all black folk, right? It's larger. Almost 4,000 priests, 7,000 congregations. That's the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Now, what's interesting to me is when Absalom and Richard split, what went right for Richard and not so right for Absalom? That Richard was able to go out and build a church, as I said, this now is about 2.5 million people, 7,000 congregations, and it's booming, as Protestant religions boom these days. So what's the difference? And I think it's because they were able to hold on to their culture and their heritage when they went to the AME church. As with most things that occur and have occurred over the centuries in this country, people of African descent and people of color in general have been asked to assimilate the other way. Richard Allen didn't do that. Richard Allen did not take the path that Absalom took. If you've ever been in an AME church, you're going to hear some inspiring preaching, some awesome music, and conversation that won't stop. And Bishop, I'm sure that's what you're alluding to when you said you participated in that. So I'm convinced that something went wrong in that exchange that happened. But what can we do about it is the question. And I would invite all of you here, because this is another one of my little pet peeves on this. We'll have a diocesan event called Absalom Jones. I think I preached at that one time. This guy is here. I think he invited me here. But you know what? That's considered a black event. We don't go. Or we'll have a Martin Luther King Day celebration. That's considered a black event. We don't go. Those are all of our heroes. So what we can do is two things. One, we can participate with our African descent siblings in those events, but also bring celebration and commemoration to our congregations. Right? That's an easy thing to do. To also, by doing that, you will get to experience and enjoy, yes, some dynamic preaching. A lot of people don't know Bishop Curry comes from that background too of preaching, right? And also the music in that. But I will tell you, many of our churches now, today, when they have their Absalom Jones celebrations, guess who they invite in for the preacher? Someone from our AME church. And it's not going to be a 10-minute sermon either. So, again, we do, in many cases, in many dioceses that have reached out, when those opportunities come about, do collaborate with our AME friends. But I tell you, Bishop, I get a little nervous when we get too close because I don't want to see our folks leave and go over to that AME church. But I think that's what we can do is to begin to bring about more opportunities for people to experience not just the AME and what they believe, because we all believe the same thing, we're all Christian, but to experience that in our church.
Thank you, Ron. So I've been conducting delicate negotiations with Convention Coordinator Sam Wiley and have received permission to go right up to 5:30 with this part of our program. So we're going to pause right now, although we can keep asking our authorities questions for the whole rest of the weekend. I'm going to see if anyone would like to come to the microphones and pose your own question to one of our experts. Again, anyone who'd like to pose a question, please feel free to come forward at this time. Our wonderful youth ushers and ministers are helping us. If none do come forward, that'll be the collective saying you'd like to do some work at your tables, talking about these three questions we've given you, which are self-explanatory. So please do come to the microphones if you've got any questions.
By the way, Bishop, Brad and I were talking about the term expert, and we decided that we are more like seasoned practitioners. Seasoned practitioners rather than experts, yes.
Microphone 3, please. Joseph.
Question to Ron. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. You say that the Black Church is in crisis. What is the National Episcopal Church is doing about it?
Thank you for that question. As a matter of fact, just last week, I was in Boston with an initiative that we started 3 years ago called the Black Congregation Leadership Initiative. And this year, we again brought 10 congregations to Boston with the opportunity. All of these congregations are congregations that have been identified by their bishop to be in a place of struggling to survive. We spent a week with these congregations, the rector and 2 of their lay leaders, preferably the senior warden and junior warden, and we have a high impact intensity week. We call it boot camp. We cover everything from vision and planning to budgeting and transformational financing to basis of collaborative leadership and other programs and the like during the week. The ideal is to help our congregations move from a place of just simply surviving to a place of sustainability and then on to thriving. Other 10 congregations we had last week, when I was closing my remarks with them, it brought tears to my eyes because they had worked so hard. And at the end of the week, we ask each congregation to come up with 3 action items that they can take back to their congregation that will make a difference in them being able to move that pendulum towards sustainability. It's one of the major objectives come down. Also, as a part of that program, we offer each congregation a coach for the next 9 months to help them live in and work through their action plan, is what we do. Finally, in the spring, I go to each of those congregations on the ground and do a program that we call Seeing God Through the Eyes of Your Neighbors. And that also with what we have is called a missional intelligence report, giving an opportunity to look at the community and see where the mission and opportunities are in those communities. So that's one of our big programs. This is a program that we offer to African descent congregations at no charge, because obviously they can't afford it. And so the ideal is really to help them through a series of conversations with professionals and experts to move to a place of sustainability. That's just one of many programs. And most of our programs in African descent ministries are focused on leadership and congregational development for that reason, to try to move us out of this crisis mode.
Thank you, Ron. If you have a question for one of our seasoned practitioners, please feel free to identify them as you pose your question. CC at microphone 4, please.
I need a lift. I really don't know who to ask this to, so I'll throw it out there for whomever would like to answer. In thinking about partnering, collaboration, those of us who are in predominantly white churches, how do you make an approach or an overture that doesn't come across as, here we are, the white saviors?
I'll start. No, we don't mind the savior piece. That's okay. We really don't, and I'm serious about that in this sense, because this something I think about quite frequently. You know, we'll go to Costa Rica, we'll go to many places on the planet and begin to set up companion dioceses, right? And most dioceses in the Episcopal Church have companion dioceses. Why can't we pair up with some of our African descent congregations? I often say the evangelism field is in your backyard. It's not down the water, down the street, it's in your backyard. And so I hope that as we think about these things, that we'll begin to partner with some of our African descent congregations, right? We're not asking for folks to come in there to tell us what to do, but we are asking, or would like help, particularly in the area of resources, and not always just financial resources, but resources. Because over the years, you know what has happened to those, and even the unfair start in the very beginning, even in this Episcopal Church. But I implore you to think about adopting, working with one of your African descent congregations.
I could give a indigenous response to that briefly. Thank you, Ron. There's a book out now. It was just released in September, I believe, by Bishop Stephen Charleston, and it's called "We Survived the End of the World." We survived the end of the world, and it's about indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere, and we survived the end of our world. We did. There was an intentional attempt to wipe us off the face of the planet and make us disappear, and the church was involved in that, by the way. Fortunately, it wasn't completely successful, and today there are about 6 million indigenous people in what is now called the United States. The largest concentration of them is right here in the Los Angeles area, not on any particular reservation or in any particular diocese. There are many, many indigenous people living right here in the Los Angeles area. We may not see them because we don't recognize them as indigenous because we've been so assimilated, but we're here. We're here, and we're survivors. We're resilient. We know how to get through the worst of circumstances. So when it comes to the church, when things look down and we start asking ourselves the question, the Episcopal Church as we know it may not be around 50 years from now, what do we do? And when we look at the partnership formation between congregations of color and congregations that have more resources, I think it's also important to remember that indigenous people have always lived with less, and we've always known how to get by and to flourish with less. For us, church has never been about a fancy building or property or silver or investments. Our clergy, for the most part, are non-stipendiary. They're not paid. Consequently, church pension group doesn't know that they exist. But the ministry gets done. The gospel is preached and lived out, and that is the most important thing. We know how to do it with less, because that's all we've ever had. So I think in partnering with indigenous congregations, let's look at it the other way around. Not so much, what can we offer them, but what can they offer us? Because I think we have a lot to offer.
Thank you, Bradley. Microphone 5, please.
Jerry Sather, Rancho Santa Margarita. One of my privileges in my Air Force chaplaincy career was being invited to preach in different churches. When I was in Misawa, Japan, amazingly, there were 3 black gospel churches in that community. One of them had over 300 people in it. And they invited this white guy to come preach, and they were so warm and accepting, and they said, wow, you actually believe the gospel. They were just amazed that I could preach in front of them, and I could do a little call and response with them as well. But it gave me a conviction that maybe I need to do the reverse and invite other people to come to my pulpit. And what if we I'd like to invite all 4 of you to come to St. John's and Rancho Santa Margarita, by the way. Your schedule might not allow for that. But what if you came, you just said, we have things to offer, other voices that we need to hear. Is that a way that we can broaden the table and hear from the other voices, and our congregation can see the rich variety that is in front of us?
In a way, that hits at one of my pet peeves, or one of my main concerns, and that is that the average Episcopal church, or the average Episcopalian for that matter, there is a serious lack of relationships between the average Anglo congregation and any aspect of people of color around them. That's the way that it has been, and it will continue to be unless we do have an intentional intervention. Actually, I would like to create the ministry of relationships. That in itself would be the first step in terms of the checklist that I'm recommending. Relationships is one of the first things that we have to be concerned about. So inviting other people into our pulpit certainly would be one way of creating and developing and fostering these relationships. And let me say one other thing. This might be a little bit beyond what your concern is or your question is, but in the Latino community, there is a serious lack of relationships between the immigrant Latino, no matter where they're from, and the native-born, especially the native-born Mexican Americans. And the church really can be the place that can bring these various generational Latinos into one place, which is not happening. It's not happening by other institutions. It's not perceived as a problem, but I see it as a problem because it creates a cultural divide. And we have to bridge that cultural and linguistic divide. And I think the church, the Episcopal Church particularly, has a role to play in this. And if it would probably be the only denomination in the country that would be doing so. And this is something that is serious and something that we have to really seriously address.
Thank you, Al. Microphone 4, please.
Hello, everybody, and especially Al, Jamie Edwards Acton. It's good to see you. We went to seminary together all those years ago, back in Austin, Texas, and I also worked at Buen Samaritano. I get asked all the time about, churches that would like to do Latino ministry and stuff. And my biggest, pet peeve or whatever thing that's frustrating to me is that the Episcopal Church almost solely understands itself in terms of the prayer book and worship. And like the only way that we can do cross-cultural ministry is via worship. When I've found that we've had a lot more success in launching ministries around stuff like shared meals together, around shared ministry together, around musical events together. And if you get to it, you get to the worship. But I feel like we don't consider it a ministry or, doing cross-cultural ministry unless it's worship. I was wondering what you thought about that, or anybody.
Thank you, Jamie. Someone like to take that on? Are we too bound by our liturgy?
Absolutely. That's why folks are going to go to the AME church we keep talking. No, but I think as with anything else, we've been doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome, right? And so, yes, we need to revisit that. We need to also, outside of the General Convention and Constitution and canons, because some of you will know we are bound to use those things, even to the extent that we can only use the 1982 prayer book and leave us in certain books. But some of the clergy out there will tell you that they are doing other things, using different type of liturgy in different types of ways. And I like what the gentleman just said a few moments ago. It goes even beyond what we do on Sunday morning. It's how do we work together with Vacation Bible School or other opportunities and things of that sort. But we are definitely too bound to our liturgy, and I'm sure Brad will probably agree with me and maybe the other panelists. If we get a chance to go around the church and see some awesome liturgy, we don't get the same dose of liturgy every week, but we can see the variety and the opportunities that are out there to do liturgy, and I can only hope that we will begin to continue to break that open. One of our colleagues wrote a book not too long ago, said the church broken wide open. That's where we need to go. Let's do it differently.
As I say, many Chinese language-speaking immigrants who had no religious background when they came to the country. So whatever you give to them, they actually for them everything is exciting and is new. But especially in our church, in Episcopal Church, I think the liturgy truly fascinating to those new believers, because they can feel that tranquility in the worship. And so this is also one strength of our church. And it's also a very beautiful heritage that we should move on with. But at the same time, the younger generation, we are facing some difficulty in attracting them to church, because for them, they actually don't feel that kind of passion that they could feel in some non-denomination churches, some evangelical churches. So I think I agree that with Al that when we are ministering to those new immigrants, I think we also can try to be more flexible in doing liturgy. and also trying new things, and also to listen to them, why they come to church, and which part of the worship that attract them, but which part that really doesn't speak to them. So I think I'm still trying out, but from time to time I bring in music. Actually, that's not from hymnal. I think younger generation, they really like more contemporary song. And so I think this is something that we also need to think about when we minister to people who never had been church, and what attract them to our church, and how can we keep them. And I think this is what I still been working on continually. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Joseph Campbell said that when you engage in a ritual, you act out a myth. When you engage in a ritual, you act out a myth. The myth, its narrative becomes a part of your life, and you start to live it out. So it's not just a story, it's not just something in your head. It becomes real to you. And we could say the same thing about our liturgy, because there's a ritual element to our liturgy. We are acting out our faith when we participate in a liturgy. And if our faith is real, our faith is dynamic, it's alive, it isn't fixed in one particular era, or one particular language, or one particular style. If we put our faith in a box like that, our faith is essentially of no use to us in our lives. We can't live it out really genuinely. So liturgy, I think, must be the same. If we were to go back to the first century and take a look at the early Christians and how they worshiped, we wouldn't even recognize it as church. Certainly wouldn't have been the church that we've known our whole life. So these things do change. They do evolve over time, and they should. They should, otherwise they're as good as dead. I think that those of us who are sincere in our faith know that our faith has to be relevant to what's happening right here, right now. And to that, I'll talk about land acknowledgments a little bit. Acknowledging the land that our indigenous tribes once lived upon, and they're no longer here, and what happened to them, and what's our response to that. People don't have the same universal reaction to land acknowledgments. Indigenous people don't always agree with them. Non-indigenous people don't agree with them. Some of us like land acknowledgments, some of us don't. We're not in total agreement. But there are some who think that land acknowledgments have no place in our liturgy. And I say they do. They do, because what are land acknowledgments about? Land acknowledgments are about truth-telling, telling the truth, confessing, and they're about beginning a healing process. Truth-telling or confessing and healing. In our Episcopal Church, to tell the truth or to confess is a sacrament. The sacrament of confession or reconciliation. And healing is also sacramental. Unction. And do sacraments have a place in our liturgy? You bet they do. And in my view, land acknowledgments, it applies to them as well.
Would you like to? And Al will offer our final reflection on Jamie's wonderful question.
In Spanish, there's a word that's called convivio. Convivio means a sharing of a meal, but it is also sharing of each other and each other experiences. I've seen situations in some of the Latino congregations, especially those that can have some flexibility to get away from a right one, right two type of liturgy and so forth, where they kind of use the meal almost like a Seder, where you are praying but at the same time, you are telling stories. And so this kind, and I certainly agree with Fennie when she says that this really appeals to the younger generation. The younger generation that is wants to get away from such structure and be more meaningful for their lives, where they would, instead of the sermon, they would talk about their week. What has been hurting them? What needs healing in their lives? I think this kind of type of convivial, call it liturgical convivial, I think we would go a long way to addressing a lot of the things that are really, really missing in people's lives. A sermon might do it, but sometimes a sermon quite doesn't do it. Or the readings, but a sharing of each other, because Latinos have a big core value called familia, the family, and also el colectivo, the collective group. And so any way that we can fashion church to be molded around convivio, la familia, el colectivo, I think that would go a long way. And I would hope that this would catch on a little bit more, but there's a lot of resistance.
Whether we call you experts, seasoned practitioners, or just a gospel quartet of wise and wonderful priests, let's give it up for Al and Bradley and Fennie and Ron.